Welcome to Under the Hood Podcast. In this podcast, we pop the hood and give you an inside look at the hows and whys of our ministry here at Cornerstone Church. I'm Michael Nave, your host. I'm realizing that this is one of my favorite moments, to take a moment and look under the hood and answer the question of, like, why do we do what we do? It is so good to have you join me for this episode. And also, once again, Nathan Rawls, thanks for joining me in studio as we take a look under the hood, talk about follow, and specifically this component, grow. Glad you're here today.
My pleasure.
All right, so ninth and final time capsule.
Crazy.
Can you believe it?
It's crazy. I can't.
36 weeks. I remember last fall when we said, hey, let's take the next 9 months and really dig into this. And to be quite vulnerable, 9 months ago, there were so many things we had not yet figured out. Even this aspect of rule of life and following. The rule of life is part of it, but it's not all of it. And now as we talk about a rule of life, we've begun to understand that this is an intentional, conscious plan to keep God at the center of your life. So these 9 relational skills that help us do just that. What else would you add to it just to kind of frame up the conversation as we jump into grow?
For sure. Yeah. I'm reflecting back on that same moment last fall where we're like, we are uber excited about like these 9 relational skills. At the time we were calling them these 9 practices, and we're like, okay, so how do we roll it out ASAP?
Right.
And then we just felt this like pause from the Spirit to be like, hey, let's not rush this. Let's not like just microwave it. Like, let's let it sit on simmer and like develop some flavor and stuff for a while.
Yes.
And so I'm so glad that we did. And it wasn't like, from my seat, it doesn't seem like it's been something where like people are like, looking down at their watch, ready to get on with it. It's actually been some favorite sermon series for a lot of people.
Yes.
So I'm glad that we did that. And along the way, as we think about follow, it's developed for us to encapsulate kind of like everything that we do around here. Whenever we say that we are all about helping people follow Jesus, this is one of those moments where you like double click on the word follow, and and we say, this is what we mean whenever we say follow Jesus.
Yes.
We want to help you like be shaped into the image of Christ. And the way the Spirit does that is by putting us in contact with the story of God, where we evaluate our worldview in contrast with the gospel, and we submit to the truth of God's word. We think the story of God, a circle of friends, those people we surround ourselves with that help us be more like Jesus, and a rule of life. And so I'm really glad that we took a beat to let this marinate a little more.
Oh, me too. So in that, these 9 relational skills reflecting these 3 primary relationships in following Jesus: God, people, self. It's this third aspect, 7, 8, and 9 of those relational skills that has been quite engaging to me.
Right.
And as we started this final section, these final 3 months, I said, you know what? It feels like we've kind of handed over topics like self-awareness and self-discipline and self-development. We've just kind of, shucked it over to the self-help, positive thinking gurus, and failed to hear Jesus say, unless you're willing to deny yourself, take up your cross, you cannot be my disciple. And so it's imperative that we understand, how do I relate to me? How do I follow Jesus in that way? And so I've especially enjoyed these the last 3 months of saying, hey, how do I relate to me? How do I follow Jesus in a way that honors the life that he has given me?
I totally agree.
Okay, so we zoom in this final month into grow.
Yep.
What are you doing to develop what God has given you? We use Philippians 3, 13 and 14 as our memory verse. One thing I do, forgetting what lies behind, straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. What a beautiful invitation from God to prepare to stand in front of him. Our sins are atoned. We are forgiven. We are the people of God. And to one day be able to lay lay those crowns at his feet,
Yep.
to lay what he has given us to his glory at his feet, celebrating how we lived out our salvation, what we
Yep.
did with our redemption. So that's kind of the concept, the construct for Grow. Week 1, we jumped into Ephesians 4. This has been a theme I've heard you reflecting on quite a bit, of put off, put on.
Yeah.
Why has that become such a passion for you?
I think it's just such a helpful framework because we think about, so a lot of times whenever theologians talk about sin, they'll talk about sins of commission and sins of omission.
Yes.
And so it's like the sins of commission are those things that we do that we ought not do.
Right.
And those are the things of the flesh that we need to put off that Paul talks about here. And then there are also things that we know that we ought to do that we do not do.
Yes.
And so those are the things that we ought to put on. And so I think like even just as a general frame of reference, whenever we're talking about Grow and specifically in our sanctification, to say, God, what's something in my life that you want me to put off?
Yes.
Something that's not helpful, something that's like weighing me down, or something that's just blatantly sinful. Like what's something I ought to put off?
Right.
And then what's something I ought to put on? Something I should start doing, or a different attitude, a different frame of reference. Like what's something that I ought to put on in my following of Jesus?
Yes.
I just think it's really helpful.
Yes, I agree. And I've really appreciated as you've shared with our staff, just in many reflections personally as you're following him. And Ephesians 4 has that, to put off your old self and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God. And in that passage, Ephesians 4, we see this call to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called. It's like, hey, you're a child of God. Hey, you've been set free. Step into this until we all attain maturity and stability, which keeps us from being tossed to and fro. If you've been in that place of like, oh, should I believe this? And oh, what about this? And oh, she said that and it really troubled me and I didn't know how to answer it. That journey of pressing in, of putting off and putting on, positions you to have that firmness of faith and to be able to step into that. And I found it to be really challenging for us as Americans because we've gotten sucked into a culture that says, hey, look deep within yourself, discern who you are, and from those experiences, then define your truth and speak it. And what a challenge, especially in this era, to be able to realize, whoa, that stuff way back. Some of those experiences were expressions of my brokenness, the stuff I need to put off and be invited into truth and life through Jesus. So I thought Ephesians 4 was a great way to just kind of frame up the beginning of this conversation.
I totally agree. And I think like whenever we are, so sometimes I think we can go off the rails in a couple different directions when we think about like the gospel as it relates to our effort. It's like we can either be all the way in the lane of like, hey, what matters most about me is that I work really, really hard to try to please God. It's like, no. Like that's not the gospel. The gospel is that Jesus accomplished it perfectly. And then on the other side, we can land in this kind of grace abuse where it's like, well, if Jesus accomplished everything, then I don't really need to try.
Yes.
And I love how Ephesians 4 sets that up. Just that simple phrase of walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called.
Yes.
That calling is the gospel. And then now we have the opportunity to walk in it. And I remember a phrase that the gospel is not opposed to effort.
Yes.
It is opposed to earning.
Yes.
We do not earn our salvation, but we do put forth effort to walk in a manner worthy of the calling.
Yes.
So I think it was a great establishing shot for the practice.
Was that a Willard quote? Does that sound right?
Maybe. I don't
Alice
remember.
Willard, maybe? Okay. All right. Week 2, we stepped into the life of David, and you framed up this whole conversation recognizing that with follow, it is that the Spirit of God uses story of God, circle of friends, and rule of life. And what a joy it was to walk along in the life of David and see those three components played out. Story of God. He believed a different story than what everybody else believed. Everybody else, when he was a kid, thought, too young, shouldn't even be invited to this special anointing. And yet when The prophet Samuel said, "You are the king." When he was anointed, he believed that. When he stepped onto the battlefield with Goliath, everybody else believed Goliath's truth that he was speaking over them, but he saw the story differently. And what a joy to see in that, both young and old and young and developing, the truth that David believed. And then his circle of friends, I think this was kind of the new aha in preaching through the life of David, was to see those 400 original flock to David, bunch of distressed people. But over time, he developed them to where there would be the famous 30 mighty men and the 3. And there was something that David recognized in surrounding himself and investing himself in that circle of friends that really paid off. And then a rule of life. From the very beginning, people recognized that he was a great musician, valor, speaking ability, people skills. And then ultimately, before he stood in front of Goliath, he says to Saul, "Hey, God's given me victory over a lion and a bear. I'm ready." He engaged an intentional rule of life and went from this kid that wasn't even invited to the party to the name we all still know, as David. Such an inspiring storyline for all of us, no matter what our beginning point is.
Yeah, I love that this was put on Father's Day as well, as guys are just kind of constantly trying to frame up what is godly masculinity.
Yes.
And so to frame that up as a man after God's own heart, that we believe the story of God, that we're surrounded by a circle of friends, and that we commit to a rule of life.
Yes.
And that I loved it.
So encouraging. No matter where you're at, if you feel like you're a son who was forgotten by his dad, or in the middle of a battle with your Goliath, or at the end, wherever you are, what a beautiful invitation. Week 3, we were in Matthew 25, one of my favorite parables, parable of the talents. And you were the one who made the comment during exegesis that the use of our English word talent goes back to this story.
Yeah.
Epistemologically, this is the origin. The Jesus story of a parable of the talents is the origin of the English word that even we use today. What did you enjoy about that parable and so pertinent to grow?
So, this is one that I just think is kind of the the keystone text for talking about growth. In my opinion, it's the one that I don't know the right way to say haunts me in a good way. It's the one that I'm just constantly asking, Lord, what is it that you've given me? What is it that's been entrusted to me? I'm a steward of everything that I have.
Right.
And so what is it that you've entrusted to me that I'm still leaving on the table, that I'm practically burying in the ground and stuff?
Right.
And I think there was something like that this morning on the way into work. I'm opening our back door here and just asking God, is that something that's still on the table? Is that something that I've not invested yet? I don't want to bury it. And so I love it because it's from a place not of afraid that he's going to cast me into hell if I don't do it well, but I just long to please him and for that well done, good and faithful servant, and to do my very best with it. I also got to say about this sermon in particular, I was listening on Friday night and I was smiling whenever you said 2 talent Tim and 5 talent Frank. And then I actually laughed out loud whenever you said Doug. You gave it early on in the sermon and you didn't explain why, but because I'd been in on the Bible study, I knew why. Yes. And I don't know if you heard me chuckle in the back of the room, but I did.
I did hear you. And I realized when you chuckled and nobody else did, I wasn't setting it up right. So I worked on my delivery of that one. And for me, what was so special about that is I was plagued with people-pleasing tendencies for a long time and competitiveness in an unhealthy way where I would find my value if I could beat somebody else. And just to recognize that 2 talent Tim, 5 talent Frank get the same commendation from our Lord. What a great reminder. Just really encouraged by that. Some fun stuff with allegory versus parable, getting free. Week 3 was really good. It is such an important text when we think about what the Lord has entrusted to us, which then takes us to week 4. And Nick Volkening was here, did a great job. It was such a joy to listen to his teaching and see what was put together. Paul to Timothy, just a beautiful celebration as Paul says, man, I saw it in your grandma, I saw it in your mom, and now I see it in you. God has given you a gift. Now fan it into flame.
Yeah.
Like what has the Lord given you? He does at least one spiritual gift, as Nick said, probably multiple ones. Now, what are you doing with it? That's your responsibility. And one of the things I really appreciated about what Nick shared was, hey, don't get paralyzed by stage gifts versus behind the scenes stuff. And he did such a great job reminding us all of the value of what God has given us, because he gave it to you, and you have that opportunity to fan it into flame. What was really meaningful for you?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff you already called out, and then I also think it's super fun to recognize how Nick was a product of people who prioritized this.
Yes,
especially the 2 Timothy 2:2, the entrusting the gospel to faithful men who'd be able to teach others as well. Seeing it, like, I love the picture he showed of him as a young high school student, and now he's like planted a church and has been a product of many godly men pouring into his life and helping him grow to be who he is now. It just inspires me of like, okay, I want to help. I want to do that. I'm a product of that. I'm like, I can look back to my dad. I can look back to other people. I can look back to you, Michael, investing in me. It's like, okay, I want to be a part of that for some other guys as well.
So good. So good. All right. So if you look back over the entire series, was there a highlight or a favorite sermon or one that stood out the most to you as far as a new learning?
So I think, just as I mentioned that, like, that the parable of the talents is a keystone one for me. I love the conversations that come out of that. It gives just such an easy starting point for conversations with other people to say, okay, so what you've been, you follow Jesus. That means that he's entrusted you with something and he's coming back. Like, what are you doing with what he's given you?
Yes.
And even just being able to have very open conversations, because it's like, I love that the parable is not, just restricted to one particular area, but it's like thinking of everything you have as a gift from God. I was talking with somebody this week about, I'm like, man, whenever we think of it that way, it's like the right question to be asking about our money is not how much do I have to give to the church, but like how much of God's money is it okay for me to keep for myself?
Right.
Same thing with our calendar. It's like, it's not just how much time should I give to God each week? It's like, how much of God's time is it appropriate for me to keep to myself? And like starting to think that way about life is just it's a game changer.
Yes. Well said. And for me, I think if I looked back over this, I really enjoyed the Eugene Peterson quote, long obedience in the same direction as a definition of discipleship, of just recognizing how prone we are to those immediate gratification things, getting caught up in the moment and lose the big picture. And with that, the week of reflecting on David's life was so life-giving to me, just seeing it beginning to end, from overlooked kid to reigning king of Israel, was a great encouragement. How about some stories? I was really blessed when Jenny posted after Nick's sermon how she was reminded her of her gift of encouragement. She was just really inspired to be able to use that. How about you? What was a story or two that you noticed?
So this one's very, very personal for me, and it was a proud dad moment, and like also just proud of our circle of friends that we have here at Cornerstone. That so Sunday morning, Tia was singing on worship team. I was busy helping with something in a different room of the church. And Silas, my almost 10-year-old, said, hey, I want to sit in on service. He's got a new devotional that he's taken like sermon notes and stuff. And so Tia, since she was going to be on stage, texted our friends Andrew and Chesney and said, hey, can Silas sit with you during service? And so he sat with them, is taking sermon notes. I don't remember what all he jotted down, but one of the things he jotted down was, what are my spiritual gifts? ? Because he's a follower of Jesus. And afterward, I was just like, my heart melted a little bit. He asked Andrew and Chesney, he's like, hey, would you guys pray for me that I would know what my spiritual gifts are? So then like Andrew is laying hands on my son and like asking the Lord to reveal what his spiritual gifts are. Silas is just asking God for it. So that had to be a highlight for me, right?
Yes. Oh, should be. What an encouragement. Okay, so as we said at the beginning of this series, hey, we're going to kind of build the plane As we fly it, we're going to fly it as we build it. And as we've wrapped up these 9 months, 36 weeks, one of the things that rose to the top was this whole discussion of circle of friends. And so in this next month, we're going to talk about what does spiritual friendship look like? And we were really impacted by a book called The Other Half of Church. We're going to highlight that a little bit in this coming month. And I just say that to say the rule of life based on these 9 relational skills, 36 weeks, and also that circle of friends, we're going to step into it a little bit more. As we built this thing, we realized just how important these 4 keystones of spiritual friendship are: relational joy, unconditional love, community identity, and community correction. That's where we'll go next, because it is so imperative. You just told the story about the Allens surrounding your son. To have that circle of friends is so important. So really excited to see that develop and be able to step into that. And then the other thing that's been developing, and Nathan, we've not said much about it, but this hyperlink, this double click on follow, and then discovering this rule of life. We've not said much about it, but for the last couple of years, people might remember those inventories for vitals, and as you said, practices, and now stepping more into that to create a tool to help people that will guide people on this journey. We're about to release an app that we've been working on for many, many months now. Give us a little inside scoop. What's developing? What can people expect?
Yeah. So, technology cannot make you follow Jesus, right? You're not going to download an app and all of a sudden you're like, spiritual superstar.
Yes.
What technology can do is help provide some structure and some connection. And so that's like, as we've been building this app, we've been thinking, how do we build a way to engage this rule of life in community? That's been the specific target. And so we've had a few pillars of that. We've said we want it to be guided. So it's not just, hey, put in any habits you want, but that it helps you step into some specific habits of following Jesus. It's personalized, that we know that not everybody worships in exactly the same way. It's like, you're a naturalist. You love to go for a nature walk. I'm like, I want to sit down and read a book. And that stirs me to worship. And so how do we personalize it? We want it to be social and not just like, hey, how do I post a whole bunch of things so people are impressed with my spiritual life, but tied into that circle of friends that they are encouraging me, and I'm being encouraged to be more like Jesus through that. And we started calling it a habit trainer, because our goal is actually that that this app would help you build your rule of life in such a way that it quickly becomes your norm. This is the way I live my life following Jesus. It's not that I'm constantly having to get in there and okay, so what do I need to do next to follow Jesus?
Yes.
But that it helps train this to where it becomes your way of life. And then actually you'd end up in a space where you would want to turn around and help somebody else establish their rule of life. That's going to be the next thing for you. So I'm excited about it. We've been working really hard on it. And I'm pumped about it. We're getting ready to go to some beta testing. So we'll be using some beta testing software that Apple uses, their program called Test Flight. That's going to be for the people who want to get in there and know that it's going to be buggy at first.
Yes.
We're not ready to go live for everybody. But if you're one of those early adopter kind of people that you're I'd love to hop in there and push some buttons and see if I can break it. We'd love to have you in that space. There's another way that they do it on Google. If you're on an Android or something like that, it's use a different app, but we would love to help you. So if you're hey, I want to be a part of that, you can email me. You can do my Cornerstone email, or probably the easier one would be nathan@thefollow.app. And I'd love to help you get connected with the beta testing program.
And you said it well in saying, hey, if you want to get in there and poke buttons and see what doesn't work, if you are not that person, just wait a few weeks. We will have it ready for everyone to use. And the piece that I found most encouraging as I was describing it to my son Leighton last night, the potential of using it to mentor other believers who are saying, hey, how do I get started? We really see this to be a tool that could be very helpful getting started in Ronald Rolheiser's essential discipleship. How do I get started? How do I begin to establish those habits? And I'm really excited to be able to provide this as a tool to parents and spiritual mentors who want to help others get started. They didn't know quite to do. How do I help my friend, my child get started in that? And so now to have a tool that will provide that guide and then allow them to personalize it and get themselves surrounded on this journey is quite exciting. Thank you for all your time that you've put into these crazy technicalities that have to be done to release an app that will be really helpful. So yes, email Nathan at thefollow.app and jump in on testing that. And very soon it'll be something that we all can use and be part of this little journey. Nathan, thanks again for being here today for Under the Hood. That's the wrap for all 9. Woo, we got it.
We did it.